Eddie, we are on Fortnite Festival now, Eddie. Let's get some jam tracks going.
So here's the thing. I'm not going to say that Insomniac needs to make a Venom game. Hell, I'm not even sure they should make a Venom game. Between Wolverine, Spider-Man 3, and possibly another Ratchet & Clank game, I think they've got their hands full. And even more than that, the general consensus on this particular version of Venom is that they missed the mark on everything that made the character special beyond his aesthetic. And all of the new things they added aren't even that good either. And on top of all that, this iteration of Venom has a dead symbiote and comatose host, so it's hard to imagine that character continuing in a substantial way. However, I do think there's a possibility that Insomniac is working on one, or at least considering it. And since I have way too much time with my thoughts at work, I wanted to weigh in and provide a pitch that I think, if executed to the best of its ability, would be the best possible outcome for Insomniac's Venom game.
I've become so numb, I can feel you there. Become so tight, so much more aware. I'm becoming this, all I want to do is be more like me and less like you.
Right off the bat, I want to talk about gameplay, and thankfully I don't have to go from scratch. For the one mission that it exists in, I really like the way Insomniac handled Venom's gameplay. His combat handles more enemies at once due to his larger size, the unique mechanic of throwing enemies or slamming them around feels awesome, as well as the ability to parry projectiles, and his takedowns feel appropriately visceral without pushing into 18+ violence. Plus, there's a decent bit of challenge, so Venom doesn't feel invincible. That being said, if you've played that level more than 2 or 3 times, you know its novelty wears off quickly, and the lack of depth quickly becomes apparent, so we need to make a lot of expansions in order to make this worth a full game. An easy start to me is the Web Strike, or Symbiote Strike in this case. This move does serve its purpose just as well as it does for Spider-Man in the main gameplay segments, connecting movement with offense and closing the gap between you and your enemy with an attack. However, I've always felt that Insomniac's take on the Web Strike is a bit weak for my taste, especially in contrast with its pioneers, Web of Shadows and Shattered Dimensions. It honestly feels weaker for Venom since he's so big but hits with the same force as this fucking teenager. So we're gonna add a little knockback and give the player more options. Now the Symbiote Strike can lead into a grab, but there will be certain enemies capable of countering your attack, and as a result, a strike parry should be implemented. One with a much tighter window than the normal melee and projectile parries. It ain't much, but it's honest work. Venom has 2 special moves in Spider-Man 2, though I've never really understood the difference. One looks more like it's a targeted wave of tendrils, while the other looks like an AoE with a smaller range. Let's keep those, but really, make them more distinct. And to fill out his roster of abilities, let's add 2 more. I don't think air combat suits Venom as a character, so there isn't really a need for a move that transitions you into it like Peter and Miles have. Instead, I think it's wiser to have flying enemies that, for a while, you can only really handle by parrying and throwing enemies at them. But eventually you'll get a move similar to Peter's symbiote Yank that can get flying enemies grounded for a bit. And on top of that, I'd like a charge move to act as a stronger strike, combining movement, damage, and a much wider area of effect. Lastly, I think gadgets wouldn't fit Venom either, so we're replacing that system with swappable weapons. They work like Prototype's weapons, or like Ghost of Tsushima's stances, being applicable in certain circumstances, but we're putting them on a time limit for balancing purposes. Venom can have cleaver hands for wider swinging attacks, maces for dealing with brutes or shielded enemies, armor to reduce damage and knockback, and a symbiote spawn to briefly convert smaller enemies into helpful little minions, reusing enemy types from Spider-Man 2. Venom's combat doesn't have to be super complex, but I think expanding on his gameplay systems from Spider-Man 2 and tailoring them more to Venom would make for a pretty amazing power fantasy. Speaking of systems more tailored to Venom, the movement for this guy is very different than Spider-Man's. Now, Venom can still swing, however, it's not his main mode of transportation. He's heavy, and so swinging won't be as fast as Spider-Man's. Instead, swinging is going to be a transitionary ability, as his main movement will be running along and tearing up buildings and using the charge jump more directly. I'd like to see the return of the Web Rush mode from the Amazing Spider-Man video games, since that ability can fit Venom even more. You slow down time and find a position you want to reach, and the game will dynamically generate a series of tendril yanks and quick jumps to get you there. However, the base movement of running, jumping, yanking, swinging, all combined with upgrades and mastery with time, will slowly disincentivize that mode, as you'll just naturally get better at the movement and be able to do cool shit like that manually. I also think it would be smart to incorporate Venom's wings as another transitionary ability, much like how the web wings are in Spider-Man 2, although these would be a later game story-based unlock and become more oriented towards gaining height without running up buildings. Venom could pop out his wings for a limited time to glide, but tapping X would allow him to flap them to get higher. I think all this is a simple way to expand on and retool some of Spider-Man's movement mechanics to suit a bulkier and more ferocious protagonist. However, there is one thing that needs a lot more fine-tuning. Easily, my biggest problem with the gameplay of all three Insomniac Spider-Man games is the section where you play as Peter or Miles out of costume. I understand the story purpose for them, but the riveting man gameplay is a drag on repeat playthroughs, so I'd like to give Eddie far more to do. First, Eddie would have his own combat system. Now, this doesn't need to be anything too deep or flashy, it's not Sifu, but something closer to the fisticuffs of Mad Max, ironically. Simple counters and a less graceful brawler style would not only fit Eddie as a character well, but could provide a nice change of pace from the symbiotic slaughter. Additionally, I'd like Eddie to take up the game's stealth systems. So at any point in the game, you can switch between Eddie and Venom by holding up on the D-pad. The reason it's a hold is I don't want players tapping it by accident in the middle of a fight, stealth, or traversal and be forced to change into the other form when it would be inconvenient. If you're in the open world, I think it would be cool to be able to turn into Eddie when out of sight of enemies to lose them, much like shapeshifting in Prototype. Here's a dangerous drinking game, take a shot every time I mention Prototype. Regardless, I'd also like Eddie to have actual stealth, similar to MJ's missions in Spider-Man 2. He won't have a taser, but using the symbiote in a limited capacity could help with the need for a ranged weapon. And lastly, I want Eddie to actually be a journalist in gameplay. Certain sections could have you looking over a crime scene, conducting interviews that you have to choose certain dialogue for to get specific information, and things of that nature. The duality is such an important part of Venom, and I'd absolutely need to have that represented in video game form. Speaking of representing Venom, costumes! I thought for a while about this, and I think 20 costumes would be pretty reasonable. Now, I assume that the game would feature around 3 or 4 original designs, potentially including a new design to make Eddie's Venom distinct from Harry's, but also including Harry's because it is a great design. So I've pulled out 16 costumes for Eddie to rock in this game. There needs to be a classic Venom, obviously. Anti-Venom has had a lot of cool designs in the books and in Edge of Time, so we would have to do him. I'd love to see other symbiotes get represented, so I really want Riot and the big-ass version of Toxin. I also think other host designs would be cool, like the Lee Price or Matt Gargan Venoms. Clearly, we need Tom Hardy movie Venom, as well as a webbed Topher Grace-esque Venom. Kinda like how the Friend or Foe design has him retain the webs, but has the proportions of a more traditional Venom. Looking to the comics again, I'd love Venom 2099, Space Knight Venom, Ultimate Venom, Zombie Venom, and his look from the end of King in Black. I'd kill for a light blue Marvel vs. Capcom inspired design, since Marvel Rivals just proved that it can still work. I think it would be kind of fun to have a more armored design that shows what Agent Venom could look like if he was roided out like regular Venom. Jesus Christ, take a shot every time I say Venom. And lastly, we absolutely need an animated series Venom, complete with dual highlights and the weird stabby pupils. And it would be nice if any tendrils matched the texture and the color of the suit. That's one super big nitpick I have with Spider-Man 2, is if you stop and look at the symbiote powers while you're using the classic or rainy black suits, the mismatched textures and shades of black can be kinda off-putting.
Jealousy, turning saints into the sea, swimming music lullabies, choking on your alibis, but it's just the price I pay. Destiny is calling me, open up my eager eyes, 'cause I miss the bright side.
Now all of this, I'm sure, sounds good as a way to make Venom a great gameplay experience. But these games are also major storytelling vehicles, and a lot of people, myself included, took issue with the story of Venom in the previous game, as it rushed through Peter's Black Suit arc and Harry's downfall to give us a bland and uninspired characterization of the symbiote itself and Venom as a joined entity. And considering that the only host for Venom in this universe is a character nobody ever even wants wearing the color black again once he's out of his character development coma, well, doing a Venom story is a little hard, but I think I found a solution. So we'd start with a scene in the Emily May Foundation, 6 months after Spider-Man 2. The building is being torn down, and hazmat teams have been sent in to clear out any potential symbiote samples and send them to a subsidiary of Oscorp in San Francisco. We'd then move up the block to a small bar, one currently in the midst of a large fight. This is going to be our introduction to Eddie Brock, drunk off his ass and kicking everyone else's. I really want this to be Eddie at his lowest. He's just lost his job at the Daily Bugle, and he's having a really tough time. It's also our introduction to Eddie's fighting mechanics. We'd eventually see Eddie bolt when the cops show up, and he has to go home. After all, he has a train to catch in the morning. Much like the Venom movie, I want Eddie and Venom's bonding to be kind of a coincidence. Eddie will be on the same train as the shipment of the symbiotes. Why is Oscorp transporting these violent alien specimens on a passenger train? Well, because the last time they used a cargo train, this Iron Ninja looking motherfucker derailed it. So that train crashes anyways, and Eddie has to avoid what looks like high-tech soldiers after surviving, and accidentally steps into the symbiote without noticing. After getting tracked down, Venom will bond in full force with Eddie and lead to our first real bit of Venom gameplay. And that's where the story kicks off in earnest. Venom and Eddie begin to develop a rapport, and we'll learn that the symbiote is more like its comic version now after suffering what is essentially brain damage from Peter's anti-venom in the last game. Meaning, yes, Tony Todd will get to play the far goofier surf the web flavor of Venom. Also, I don't have a particular fan cast for a video game Eddie Brock, but for this pitch we're gonna say he's played by Alan Ritchson. I don't know. But we'll get to experience this buddy cop dynamic play out as the two vie for different goals. Venom is more concerned about stopping the other symbiotes that were on the train, who were more loyal to Null and have surely started attaching to human hosts. Meanwhile, Eddie is more concerned about investigating the train crash, which we'll learn was caused by the Life Foundation, the company Oscorp was sending the symbiotes to anyways. This will lead into a whole mystery about the Life Foundation and how their CEO, Alistair Smythe, is trying to break away from Oscorp and plan to make the symbiotes disappear in the crash, only to sell them as super suits on the black market. Eddie was already on his way here to try for a meeting with the Daily Globe about a job, so having an exclusive report on the Life Foundation in hand would be a huge plus. A lot of Act 2 is going to be Venom and Eddie building their relationship and uncovering the mystery behind the Life Foundation, a lot like in Prototype, while also fighting a gauntlet of symbiotes consisting of Agony, Phage, Riot, and Lasher. Sorry, Scream, you were already in the last game. I'd also like for Venom to eat each of the symbiotes after the boss fights to get new powers, again, a lot like in Prototype, though at least this time I'm specifically pulling from Prototype 2. One beat I would like to hit near the end of Act 2 / beginning of Act 3 is a fight with Spider-Man. Obvious question, why is Miles on the opposite side of the country? Obvious answer, Miles was keeping tabs on the last of the symbiotes being transported out of the city. When he heard about a crash and saw news of monsters in San Francisco, he got the first flight over and left Pete to cover the city for a few days. Obviously, Peter is, semi-retired as of the ending of the last game, but I feel like if Miles had to leave on an urgent mission, he wouldn't mind putting the suit back on for a couple days to take care of things. So once you beat Miles, he kind of buys into this whole, okay, maybe this Venom doesn't suck thing, and works with you throughout the third act to stop the symbiote invasion. Once he leaves, it's on Eddie to take down Smythe, who, at this point, is piloting a giant robot called the Slayer to facilitate the final act. I also think it'd be cool if the Slayer robots were a mini-boss type enemy in the campaign, and this Slayer is twice as big, so you're kind of prepped for it. As for how to characterize Smythe, I think it would be interesting to see Smythe view the symbiotes as things to be controlled and used as weapons, whereas Eddie, having spent so much time in the suit, sees the somewhat ironic humanity within them. I did have some side content ideas for this game as well. Obviously, combat and movement challenges are required here. I mean, I say obviously, but, Spider-Man 2 only had Mysteriums and Hunter Drones, so maybe it's not obvious, but you know what I mean. I don't really know how to contextualize these, so feel free to suggest something in the comments. I'd also like to see Eddie do some side jobs for the Daily Globe so we get more journalism stuff. To expand on Eddie's combat, I want a mission chain where he's approached by a cop named Jean DeWolf, and she makes Eddie a deal if he can help her on a case. She is trying to track down a cop killer going by the name The Sin Eater, and knows he frequents an underground fight club. Eddie gets to join and work his way up the ranks to catch the guy. And of course, I'd love to see a return of the bases for the Life Foundation, with the added benefit that you could take them down as Eddie in stealth or go in loud as Venom for pure combat, with certain enemy types only appearing for one or the other.
Ra ra no ma ma ga ga ooh la la, watch out that romance.
And there we go, my ideal take on Venom in the Insomniac universe, expanding on his pre-existing gameplay, giving us Eddie Brock, showing us a different side of this world, and ultimately ensuring that the Lethal Protector actually gets to be a protector. If anyone has suggestions, changes, recommendations, please let me know in the comments. I love engaging with you all in these videos, and I'd especially love to hear what you do to expand upon my story or gameplay ideas, particularly the former since I know I was pretty light on it. But beyond that, I've got nothing left to say except...
Surf the web, surf the web!
Hey, thanks for making it to the end of the video. If you like this one, please consider checking out the rest of my content, as well as liking this video, leaving a comment, and subscribing to see more. As always, I gotta thank the patrons on screen, as well as the following $10 tier patrons: Devrick5, Did You Get It Guy, Spark Plasma, and Wrestling Fan 99. If you feel so compelled, consider joining them to see your name on screen, get access to exclusive videos, and early access to other videos, and overall just support the channel so I can put even more effort into awesome videos like this one. Alternatively, you can use my Fortnite creator code, Chimera Films, all one word. The next time you want to get a cool scan or emote, you can follow my Instagram if you want to see my very occasional art, or follow my Twitter for random announcements and other thoughts. And lastly, join the Discord if you want to interact with like-minded fans, stay up to date on content, or reach out to me directly. Everything's linked down below. Thanks, everyone.